Hello
Hello.
and welcome to It Depends, a live show where we discuss everything you need to know about software development and technology in business. I'm Natasha, your host, and joining me today is our COO, Bill, a solutions architect at Atmosoft. Hi, Bill. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay. So today we are planning to talk about why do software developers projects fail. So we're going to dive into some questions to go over that and get Bill's expertise on that. So are you ready for the questions, Bill?
I am ready for the questions. Let's do it.
Okay, fantastic. So our first question is, in your experience, what are some common reasons why software development projects fail, and how can these pitfalls be avoided?
Okay, so I have a lot on this one. So I kind of pre-got the questions today because I wanted to spend a little bit more time so I could clarify my thoughts, especially around this particular topic because there's a lot of reasons around why.
Hmm.
And so, one of the number one reasons is lack of clear requirements. Okay, mm, we have in the industry, we have kind of sometimes we have a disconnect between management and then the development team. So like a lot of times, not recently, but more in the past, I would go in and work for an organization. I couldn't tell you what the organization objectives were at all. I couldn't tell you what the business goals are for the year. We want to increase profits. Here's our plan. Here's what we're doing. It was basically, fix this, write this, do this. There wasn't any why behind it, which is kind of critical to understanding the particular problem you're trying to solve. If you're just getting the piece of the puzzle of, oh, put up this screen and we want to display this data element and we want to have these kind of things, that's fine. But maybe there's a better way to do it if you actually understood kind of the business objective. And that goes down to making sure that when you get your requirements, you're clear and you understand the work that you're trying to perform. And I would even say go a step forward and try to understand the why of the work that you're trying to perform, because that's critical. Because maybe a lot of times we'll go in and we'll start working with a company and they'll start out with, this is what we want, and then when we start diving in, we start flushing out the details, we'll realize like, okay, that's not exactly what they want. What they want is some other thing over here, because they want to increase, customer retention or decrease turnover rate among the employees, in using internal application. I'm just kind of pulling random stuff up. so
Yep.
so that's number one. And then number two, and I think a kind of a fault here, picking on agile recently, but I think kind of the fault
Mhm.
here, kind of is wrapped in with kind of the whole agile thing that everyone picked up. I'm not saying it's bad; it works, but I mean, there's definitely, everything can be improved always, right? We're
Yep.
never at the most optimized, and so in agile, we want to get to work fast, and we want to start doing stuff, and we want to iterate over the work. But then I think you kind of miss out on the planning, and so that could kind of put you in this perpetual state of kind of spinning the hamster wheel. And it really hasn't been thought of like what you're going to do, and again, what your end objective is. Like, we want to get this website out so that customers can do, they can help themselves and they can see all their reports and their metrics and their numbers and download any files that they're interested in, or whatever. I mean, that's a clear defined reason for this customer portal that you are building. And so I think not correctly planning and correctly estimating, which estimating is, we'll do a topic this week. We have to talk about estimating because estimating is crazy. This is part of the reason why we kind of changed the name too, because when you're doing estimating, it depends, right?
Yep.
And nothing you're ever doing is exactly the same as what you did before. So if you did the exact same thing before, it took 3 weeks, and you do it again now, it's probably not going to take 3 weeks. It's probably going
Yeah.
to take longer because your framework may have updated, your version of Studio may have changed, your OS may have updated to a different version and changed some versions. I mean, there's so many variables and factors to consider. So I want to do estimating. I am getting better at it, but I will admit it's complicated to do. To really
Yeah.
sit down and think through, like, okay, we have this problem, and we're gonna do XYZ, and I think it's gonna take these steps, and I think each one of these steps is gonna take 4 hours, 8 hours, whatever. And it gets complicated, and as you go further out, your timelines get more and more incorrect. So I think that's number two. And then one thing we talk about often, which is we are all on board on the documentation. Poor documentation could be a reason why a project fails. Again, that one, sorry, poor documentation. It falls in line with poor communication, which was the next point that I wanted to address. So the next point was poor communication. I think that represents itself in documentation. I think, and I'll just get throw this out there on a limb, and if you're guilty of this, maybe you should consider thinking about it. A lot of time, not a lot of times, sometimes you'll meet developers who want to stay important, and so they don't want to share critical information about a system.
Mhm.
Particular piece works like this, and I coded it really badly, and I don't want anyone looking at the code. So I'm just not going to talk about, again, the invoicing subsystem or something like that. It happens occasionally, not very often, and we'd have Microsoft never do that. But we're open book. We'll explain everything too. Don't have a problem. Not ashamed of the work we've done, but sometimes you can run into scenarios like that, and I think that also kind of can lead to a facilitation of poor communication, and then team members not collaborating. I'm a solo keyboard jockey as well. I do like just putting on some music super loud and sitting down and getting some stuff cranked out. But on the flip side of that, people need to be aware of what I'm doing
Mhm.
and the why, and it shouldn't just be running off kind of doing, going Lone Ranger on the code base. So I think communication is kind of critical. And when there's not good communication between the team and upper management, I think that's a good sign that your project is going to have some pretty serious problems. Um, this one's a big one, and one that I always kind of go. I try to not do this at all. So this is lack of user involvement. Okay,
Okay.
one of the cool things about agile is the iterations and the sprints, and then getting the customer involvement, right? Because again, when we talked last week, when we talked about different ways to manage a project, we mentioned something called waterfall. And waterfall was, you had a bunch of BAs, a bunch of project managers, maybe some developers. They all get together and they write this big huge document, and they do all this research, and they figure out all the buttons and the screens and everything, and then they throw it over the fence, and the developers go away for 6 months and then come back. By the time that 6 months is expired, you did not write the application the business needs anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you wrote it perfect to the requirements, but we're 6 months later, and the major customer or major competitor came out with something in the business, and the business needed that particular feature in their application. They lost had a whole bunch of attrition over to this other platform. And so you really need to be able to do that type of communication, and just understanding, um, getting your end user involved. And so your end user could be your PM. It could be an actual customer who is going to use your product or platform. So what you want is, and as early and as often as possible, you want to be showing this, like, hey, we just did the invoicing list screen this week, and we're showing all the invoices, and this is the information that we're showing in this grid that we think is the most relevant information you need to know about an invoice. And the customer's going, no, I need the number. Like, maybe you just have, a description or something like that. You're not showing the number for whatever reason. And they're like, no, I need to know the number. I need to know the 6-digit number assigned with the invoice. That needs to be right up front. Or maybe you need to reorder the columns. Like, you're not using this every day. So
No.
you start with a best guess, then you
Mhm.
do a demo, and then you take that feedback and you iterate on the feedback, and then you end up with a better product. So not getting your end users involved is a big piece here. Not testing, which happens way more often than you think, and it's not a great idea. If you're an organization that has software that you're developing, and then you just put it out there, and you don't have a testing team behind your product that's going in and clicking all your buttons and trying to break it, that's a huge mistake. So when we're developers, I'm not saying we get code blind, but actually I am. We get code blind, right? I'm not thinking. I try to think about all the paths, but I know the code, and then when you're doing your self testing or checking your screen to make sure data's loading and everything's coming up, you're most likely most of the time always taking the happy path, and it's
Mhm.
not really it is our job to think of some of those scenarios, but there's some more complex scenarios. It really takes a trained tester to go in and be like, okay, if I select this invoice number, I click the edit button, and then I change this from status 1 to status 8, and then I hit the back button, and then I go back in. They'll find these scenarios where you're like, oh, I know why that's happening, but I'm not
Yeah.
100%. Like I wouldn't have thought of that on my own to hit the back button, right? Because
Yeah.
we're trying to push forward, and we're trying to get something done, and we may not necessarily be thinking about the full scope of a particular problem. Like the login box always works. I'm not worried about the login box when I'm navigating to the report screen, which I'm currently working on. I'm just logging in and I'm doing this, and then maybe I forget to check. Oh, can I go to the report screen without logging in? Oh, whoops. Yep. And it
Yep.
displays everything, right? That's a security
Yeah.
vulnerability. So getting your users involved is important, and it ensures that you're going to have a good delivery too, because you're doing what they want. That is one aspect of Agile I'll never argue with. I think the communication piece and the iteration piece are the two like foundational changing things that Agile came up with. I think they're super important. So we subscribe to those tenets
Yeah.
a lot.
So, can I pause you for a moment because we do have a question in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question in the chat says, "Hey Bill, recently I read an article that argued against estimating in software development. What do you think?"
Okay, so totally 110% agree. One of the methods that I like to use is using the Fibonacci sequence to determine the complexity of a task versus um, the complexity of a task versus actually putting our estimates to it. The problem that happens with that most of the PMs that I've worked with will eventually want to go to is they're like, oh, they're called story points, right? And
Mhm.
so we do these story pointing based on what we think the complexity is, and I think that ends up with gives you a better idea of the metric. But eventually, someone will be like, "Oh, it looks like it's one story point to 6.75 hours of development effort," and I think that's a mistake. I think what those points should represent is I think what those points should represent again is the difficulty. So that's my preferred method. I prefer not to give any time estimations. Where you come into the problem is as a consultant, right? I need to give the client a number. If you engage with us, it's going to be $10,000 or 5,000 or 8,000,
Mhm.
whatever that amount works out to be, and I have to try to get close to around that number without trying to go over. And if you're doing a fixed bid project, which as a consultant, I don't recommend fixed bid. I've never been in a fixed bid situation where I've come out ahead. I'm always either off or something else. So I'm really kind of a time and materials kind of fan. But then you'll get into the argument or the discussion point that they'll say, I don't think or how do you know when you're going to be done, right? And so okay, so if we take something and it's super complicated and then we divide it up into sections, and then we start working through the work required to do each one of those modules or each one of those pieces, you can start to get an idea when things kind of solidify. I know we all have deadlines. And
Mhm.
so what we do with deadlines is, let's just say there's a sales conference coming up in 3 months, and that sales conference is we want to demo the new version of or new feature that we've added to our product at the sales conference, right? So the way to do that is to say, okay, I have this much time, and we think we're doing some complex things, and so we start to order the complexity by doing the complex things first, right? We don't want to be tackling one of the hardest problems like right when we're up against the deadline. So we want to order our tasks in order of complexity, and then move along that axis. And then at some point, you may have to start pulling features, or you may have to start pulling items that just aren't going to get done by that deadline. So you can always deliver something every week in Agile, or the length of your sprint. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month. It's really team dependent. It depends. And
Yeah.
so any of the length of time that you have in your sprint, you should be delivering and then iterating and adjusting your schedule. So it feels like we want to say like, okay, here we are, we're done. But is software ever really done? Right? There's always new stuff to do. There's always better validation to add. There's always code that we can clean up. There's always refactoring that we can do. But at some point, we have to be done. And so we have to define that definition. It's called the definition of done. What does it need to be? What is the minimum viable product that we can deliver to meet this deadline for this sales conference? I think we could do these 5 things, and in this week, 3 weeks, month period or whatever, I think we could do these 5 things, and these 5 things are this complicated. And so we're going to do this most complicated thing first, and we're going to time box it because we have a time constraint. And we're going to say, if we can't get this most of the way working 80% there within 3 weeks, then we're going to go back to our board, and we're going to see what we actually can deliver. And I think that's a way that you solve that particular problem. I agree with the commenter's statement 110%. I don't think okay. I've met, like, in my whole entire career, maybe like 3 people that are accurate. Like, if they give you an estimate, you could be like, yeah, that's probably gonna be done in 3 weeks. I am not. I try my best. I get close, but other times I'm like, I'm way off. What if you've never done Blazor or Django and Python or something like that, and someone wants that product? Then, to be honest, if we're all being honest with ourselves, we're just guessing. We're basically guessing based on how long I think it would take me to do it in C#, and then I'm going to translate that over to Python, and that's just not gonna. You're not going to nail that. I think I've been more accurate on estimating complexity. I think this is going to be really hard, so I'm going to give this a 13. And because I no one else in the industry is doing this right now. I'm using all these super new technologies, and there's very few Stack Overflow articles about it if I run into problems. So this is going to be exceptionally hard. And I think that we need to, we're going to try to do that first. But I think the complexity measurement is a much better way to go.
Okay, so project managers, instead of maybe asking for time estimates, try doing a complexity model where you're asking the amount of complexity for a task and then adding the story points accordingly that way.
Right. And you want to be careful, right? Because the way that human perception works, if I tell you, hey, Tasha, this shade of white is 6 on a scale. And then if I tell you, oh, this other picture right here is a shade of white that's a 7, mentally in our heads, we're not really going to see a difference, right? So that's why I think complexity measured in Fibonacci. So that's 0, 1, 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 5, and then so you're basically adding the previous 2 numbers together to get the next one in the set. Shows a gap that's wide enough for our brain to understand that there's a difference. If I tell you something is a 5, and then I tell you something is a 13, there's a difference between 5 and 13. There's a difference between 5 and 8. There's a difference between 8 and 13, right? And so the gaps get larger as you go out and your numbers get bigger, and there's a difference in our brain that we can see. If I tell you, oh, I think it's on a scale of 1 to 10, I think it's going to be a 7, and someone else kind of picks a 7 for an easy string manipulation problem or something like that, that you're going to kind of wind up in the same spot. And so I like Fibonacci. So if you're doing story pointing, you can look this up. It's all over the web. Look up how to do story pointing with Fibonacci, because I think that those type of numbers make a lot more sense to our brain than a 1 increment. Like, really, what is the difference between a 7 and an 8? It's all subjective.
Okay. And then if you want to go back to what you were saying about the first question, you can finish that.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying, like, basically the other thing that I could see as a big kind of yep, there it is.
Yeah, I just have
the other place that I could see that's a problem around delivering software is an organization's resistance to change. Okay. Part of the Agile Manifesto, which I like. There are some things I like and some things I don't like, and that's okay. And so part of the things I really like is the constant iteration, optimization, and improvement phase. I think that's critically important to getting good at delivering software, good at delivering the right software and taking that feedback and going like, okay, maybe I took a little bit too long on this. I'm weak in the authentication area, or I'm weak over here and I need to do some improvements. That's a personal thing, right? But a lot of times you'll see organizations where they do agile scrum, but it's kind of like this almost I'll just be honest. It's kind of like this pretend thing, right? Where they're saying they're doing agile and scrum, but they're actually not. There's no demo at the end of the sprint. There's no how can we do better next time? What worked? What didn't work? There's no team communication, and there's nothing. But the organization wants to say they're agile, so they can put it on their job postings, and everyone can come in. Yeah, we're doing scrum, and we're doing this, and then when you get into the organization, you realize like it's just a scrum agile wrapper around basically kind of waterfall, top heavy kind of project management, and they have no intention of changing that. There could be people on the team, they're fully aware that this is not agile, this is not scrum, and they're just going along with it because the organization is just like, nope, we're going to do it this way, but we're going to call it this, and everyone else in the organization is like, okay, sir, we're on it, more job. And so when organizations become really resistant to change, that's a good indicator, or not a good indication, can be an indication that your project may be set up for failure because you're just not going to adapt. No, you come in with a new methodology and you want to be like, oh, hey team, I discovered this last week, and if we use this one free open source library to do logging, we don't have to implement this whole entire logging subsystem. But then the organization is like, oh, we always use this logging. This is the only type of logging that we accept. There are actually valid architectural reasons to push that down. It's kind of a poor example, but it is also like we're not going to change anything. Logging is always done like this. It's always logging, and it looks like this, and it's this table structure, and it's this thing. There are actually good reasons to push that across the enterprise, but in most cases, it's more like the developer before you picked Log4net. And that's just what everyone's doing, and no one wants to change it, even though there's better logging options out there. So I'm ready for number 2, and then probably stop at 2.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think we're going to have time for much more after question 2. So, okay, here's the final question for today, which is, can you share a specific example of a software development project that you've seen fail, and what lessons can be learned from that experience?
Okay, so I had a period in my career where I was working for a gentleman. It was kind of an independent contractor thing. I was working for a gentleman out of Atlanta, and this guy was just 100% convinced that we could do this particular thing in. It wasn't called Lightspeed. Lightspeed I'm getting from somewhere else. I think it's that training thing we've been using. But it was called Light something. It was like a Silverlight. So Silverlight came out, and then this Light something came out, and it was basically one of those tools where it just did a whole bunch of work for you. But it was one of those things where it is always the most frustrating thing. You could get like 80% there, and then the customer or something would ask for this one thing that they really had to have. I think at this point I was doing some light switch. No, I don't know. I was doing some. It was a company that did preventative maintenance, and we were working on basically a pest control application, and he wanted to be able to intake these diagrams of these plants, and then you could just drop down onto the map these little points to show where your pest control boxes were, right?
Okay.
And it sounds simple, but this is a hugely complicated problem because like they're uploading any image. This isn't it needs to be a 1280 by whatever. It could be any size, and then you have scale and you have relative scale. And I got to be honest with you, doing animation and graphics type thing, I can do that, but you know what? You're better served. It would probably be cheaper for you to hire somebody else to do that particular piece. It's not an area where I'm like especially good. And I was having to do all this trig stuff and this weird scaling stuff, and I just couldn't get it. And so I went to him, and I'm like, this isn't I'm not good at this. Like
Yeah.
I've said that very few times in my career, but I am willing to admit when I'm out of my depth. My brain does not work this way. It's not. I'm not getting this. It's just week after week of just pure frustration trying to get these maps to render so you could put these little boxes down, and then got that, and then when you try to pull it up later, all the boxes would be over in the corners, somewhere else,
Yeah.
or it would be a different scale, and then oh, what if they want to upload a new image? We should be able to transfer between two. I'm like, this is not my thing. And so
Yeah.
the project ended up my work effort on it ended up failing because I didn't have the requisite knowledge. It wasn't my area of expertise, and I just got pushed to be in that situation. So that's another thing we could add to that original list, which is make sure you have the right resources to do the work that you want to get done. There are a lot of people that are good at a lot of things, but there are very few people. In fact, I don't know many that are good at everything. And so sometimes if your developer comes in and says, "Hey, I'm not a DBA. I don't know how to do these indexes. I don't know how to do a maintenance plan. I don't know the proper use of a trigger. I don't know when it's like a lot of developers can do a database, but they don't really understand like the internals of how databases work and how to optimize queries and index coverage and setting up maintenance plans and backup plans. That's not their area of expertise, right? That's a DBA's job, right? I can do that stuff. But that's just because I'm super interested in databases. I love databases, and so I just got into it. So I just learned it by proxy. But maybe your developer's not a DBA, and so you shouldn't be expecting him to maintain your production environment efficiently and keep everything running and optimizing queries. That's not his day-to-day go-to. So getting the right resources is super important. And do I have another one? I've not failed many projects. We were able to recover most of them. And everyone that I can think of all boiled down to the wrong resource, me included. I was the wrong resource for that particular objective. Technology stacks that look really awesome from the outside. So there's a lot of people, a lot of managers will be maybe they came up from coding, or maybe they've never done coding before, and they start checking out the power apps and the light whatever product, and they see these products and they're like, look, we could do this and this, and then you start evaluating the platform. You're like, this is gonna be one of those 80-20 problems. I get most of the way there, and then the last 20% are going to be impossible, and you're just going to be wasting a ton of money listening. That goes back to communication. That kind of happens. I've been in that situation a couple of times where people were just convinced that this product would be the one, and we could get this done fast, and we could get it done, and it just turned out that after months of trying to make it work, I could have just done it in .NET. We would have been
Yeah.
this would have been done at this point. There's some, you got to take that into consideration. There's just some problems with some platforms are just not going to go where you need them to go, and you need to realize those limitations quickly. So basically, that's a fail fast one.
Yeah. I think it also comes down to the point of like when you're looking for a new laptop, a lot of the time you'll talk to like a family member or something about like what you need, and they ask you what you're going to do on it, and they figure out all these things, and in a way they are consulting you so that you can figure out what type of laptop that you need to buy. And you kind of need to do the same thing with a developer. You should be consulting with someone who is in the developer sphere, who can tell you what developers or what type of coding languages they need to know and stacks they should know, so that you hire the right person. Because a lot of the time there will not be enough information in the job description for the developers to vet themselves. So they're
Yeah,
really hoping that you vetted it correctly, and that when they say, "Oh, I only know .NET," and you said, "Oh, I work in .NET," then it's not going to be a surprise, and then they have to work in VB.
yeah. So like a C# thing, yeah, or a Python switch out thing,
Yeah.
and I think that yeah, the whole job thing can, especially on the interview process, can be a little bit challenging, because I oftentimes think people go out and be like, they'll go talk to the existing developer, and he'll be like, oh yeah, we need ADO.NET and VB. And then the recruiter or whatever goes out and looks those words up and has been like, okay, yeah, so we should ask for SQL Server and this other thing. And then they'll write out I always like the job descriptions where they put out the job description of where they want the position to be in
Yeah.
the future. You're going to be Agile Scrum, but when you come in, it's waterfall
Yeah.
and BB6 and all this old. I had that problem actually. I'm gonna name names because there's a huge company. This is 20 plus years ago. I had that problem with Micron, so they
Yeah.
hired me to come in as a consultant to do this one thing, and then when I got in there, it was fine because I already knew BB6, but I got in
Mhm.
there and it was not great code at the time. I'm sure they changed. I know a lot of confident people that work there. Not just in Micron. This is my experience, so it's subjective. And so I got in there, and it was this crappy BB6 program, and they told me I was going to be working on .NET and all this other thing, and it was tied to a Sybase database, and it was a core application. No one wanted to touch it, so
Oh
the
no.
consultant got thrown it, and yeah, I gotta be honest. I didn't last long there. I think the manager just didn't like me. I was like, well, I mean, this is not what you guys hired me for. Like, I want to do this other because it was new at the time, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to do .NET, and, and
Yeah.
and I was young. And I didn't have as broad of an appreciation as legacy systems as I have now. So.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I really want to just do this other stuff. Like, how are we going to get here? And they're like, oh, maybe next year we'll be into that. And I was like, whoa, next year? So you got to be careful on that too. Make sure
Yeah.
you ask when you go into a job interview, are you actually doing .NET? I mean, is this a current project or is this something you plan to do in the future? And there have been several other organizations they've done the bait and switch on the job thing. I think it's a lot less common now than it was in the past, but I've had that happen more than once.
Yeah.
Where you interview for a job and you're all like, yeah, C#, you get in there and you're like, oh yeah, it's BB.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right,
This
all
isn't
right.
what you had on the job posting, but
Yeah,
okay.
I guess I'll do BB, even though I spent years getting away from BB because I don't know. I think they did good on the. I'm rambling.
You're okay. Okay. Well then, do you have anything you want to say before we close out?
Nah, this was a good one, and
Yeah.
we're gonna do project failures all week,
Mhm.
and we will. I will dedicate a whole episode to estimation. We will go over estimation techniques. We will talk about it. I will tell you some of the strategies I use to get my numbers down. There is this one famous one where you just double everything, but again, you're just guessing, and I think as an industry, we all need to just come out and say, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I think it's going to take 8 hours, and just be honest, like with ourselves. Like one of the tenets that we've been working on is tell the truth, especially to yourself. So let's be honest. Estimation is hard. It's an MP problem, and you can't know all of the variables. You just can't. There's too many things, especially if the application isn't just going to be running on your machine.
Yeah.
If it's going to be deployed, you have a whole nother gambit of things. I got to worry about OSs and SQL Server versions and task scheduler and processing scripts and all this other stuff. I mean, it's just guess. But there are ways that you can do better, and we will go over that later on this week for sure. I definitely am super interested in talking about estimation because I have a problem with it, and I have a problem with the way it gets approached by other people as well. So that was a great question today. I
Yeah.
love that one. But yeah,
Yeah.
I like complexity estimations. Those ones I'm good at. I can tell you how hard I think something is. I think this is a 7. Like I think this is going to take 2 sprints because this is super hard, and here's how hard. And then the other one we'll talk about is the story point poker, which is an interesting one where basically everyone hears what the use case is, and then everyone flips up a card and says how hard they think it is, and so you don't get you can eliminate some bias
Mhm.
psychologically. Like if you and me are doing it and we're all doing the estimation, and I say a 7, chances of you picking a number around the 7 is very, very high.
Yes.
Like 98% that especially if I go first, right? I'm
Yep. Yep.
senior, and you're like, oh, you said 7,
Yeah.
and so that gets you the capability to do that communication thing where say like you said a 3 and I said like 8, and then we could discuss, and I could be like, did you think about the fact that we have to do logging this way and we have to write it out to a flat file and we're going to write it out to a database as well? And you'd be like, no, I didn't consider that portion of logging of this particular task. And then you could say, okay, I want to change my estimate. I now think, whatever. And then you get kind of a normalized consensus. I think you end up with way better estimations doing consensus as a group that tries to be as non-biased as possible. And that's why you do the cards and you don't just all say out your number, because I'm senior and people look at me and they're like, this guy probably knows what he's doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm guessing. This guy hasn't said that he's guessing. So he said 7. I'm going to say 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you want to try to eliminate that bias as well.
Yeah, I think especially when you're dealing with like different developers, like I think a lot of the time people think they can talk to front end developers the same way they talk to back end developers, and that they'll think the same and they'll understand like all the steps. Whereas like a front end, like for me, I'm like working with maybe JavaScript, but not like C# or anything like that. So I'm like expecting you to figure it out so I can think of what I'll have to do for the front end. But then, like you said, there's a logging thing that you have to do in the back end that maybe I just didn't think about.
Sure. Yeah. It brings up the whole team's awareness too, and it improves everyone's skills. So yeah, we'll definitely nail that this week. I'm looking forward to that one. Actually,
Yeah, same. I also
I
think
I have a very strong opinion on estimating, and it's mostly because I'll be honest, that I'll just be horrible at. I'm just horrible at it, and I think if more developers just stood up and said, you know what, I don't step and say you don't know, that doesn't look good. But if more developers just stepped up and said, I'm just guessing. To be honest with you, there's too many variables here. I think maybe we end up in a better spot.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, we'll definitely go more into about estimations later. I think it's very important for us to be transparent about it, because I think a lot of the time, a lot of developers agree with what you're saying, but they don't want to be the ones who say it, right? They don't want to be the first ones to say, listen, I'm just bad at it. I don't know how everyone else is doing it, but I can't get it right.
3 people in my career are consistently correct. Out of the thousands of people that I've worked with, the 3 people were consistently correct. 3. And I'm not sure if they were just and statistically they could just be good guessers.
Yeah, yes.
Right? No, seriously. Like they could be on the spectrum of guessing right all the time. And you have no way to compensate for that particular variable. They could be really good at guessing, or their brain's like, oh, they just auto figures out the test. Like me personally, I think about it for a second, and then my brain's like 7.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't think past that. Yeah, on the spectrum of guessing, I am on the bad part.
Yeah. I'm over there too. And then, like, there are some techniques where you could improve your guessing, but as a whole, I think the whole concept of estimating time is erroneous. It's just not a. Yeah, it's just not. It never works. And if everyone was like those 3 people that I know they're really good at it, then it would be fine. But I mean, how many times are you like 8 hours and then you're done in 2? Like that's a significant margin of error. Or 8 hours and you're done in 3 weeks. That's a significant margin of error, and that has happened to me more than once.
Yeah.
I like that one. Nice,
Brandon says time is fake anyway. Okay, but we're gonna close out because we went a little over today.
Okay, that was good.
Yeah, it was a good discussion, so I'm not mad about it. But anyways, if you want some help with consulting or any other questions that you may have, feel free to schedule a 1-hour free consultation. If you ever even want to just get in a call with Bill and just talk to him about stuff, his Calendly link is there, so you can talk to him through that. But anyways, we're going to close out. That's it from us. Join us next time as we explore more tech topics on It Depends. Remember to stay curious and stay integrated.
Bye.
Bye.